In the last video, we talked about the first part of the speaking test. Continuing the series, in this video, we'll talk about part 2 of the speaking test. We'll begin the video by talking about what happens in the part 2 of our speaking test. We will then discuss some tips to help us get a good score in the cue card round, that is the second part of our speaking test. And then we will finally also practice one cue card topic. Let's start with the overview of part 2. So we've just finished our part 1, where the examiner asked us some familiar questions. So that is more of a warm-up round because we would have most likely already practiced the topics that were asked on the part 1 of our speaking test, because those are basic general questions. These could be questions about our family, our friends, our likes and dislikes, our hobbies and interests, or our work. Now, the examiner gets to assess our actual speaking skills in the part 2. Well, that's not to say that the examiner has not been assessing us on part 1. They of course have. But in part 2, we're required to talk continuously for about 2 minutes on a topic that the examiner will give us. This is why part 2 is also called individual long turn. In this part of our speaking test, the examiner will give us a topic, and we will also get 1 minute's time to prepare our answer. We then have to speak on the topic for about 1 to 2 minutes. Well, actually, we have to continue speaking until the examiner stops us. During that 1 minute's preparation time, we're also allowed to make notes. So the examiner will give us the topic card. We may also call it a cue card. And we will also be given a blank paper and a pencil to make notes with. The cue card will have a topic and about 4 questions related to the topic. While we have to make sure that we talk about the topic mentioned on the cue card, it is not mandatory to include all of the bullet points, the 4 questions written on the cue card. Our cue card usually is about one of these topics. There could be topic about people, or places, or events, or experiences, or activities, or we could be asked about some things. So our cue card topic is going to be one of these. So it may be helpful if we prepare some opening sentences for each one of these. For example, if I'm required to talk about a place, I may start with something like, there are quite a few places that I like to visit in my free time, but here I'd like to talk about. Remember that speaking is an informal module, so try and use informal phrases. Try and use contraction forms. For example, instead of saying, I would like to talk about, I may rather say, I'd like to talk about. Now, while for your first and third part of the speaking test, you may stop talking when you want to or once you think you have answered the question. In cue card, wait for the examiner's instructions, both to start your talk and also to finish your talk. Now, some students feel 1 minute is just not enough time to think of the ideas. Now, obviously, you do not have to try to think of everything that you're going to say during that 1 minute's time. Of course, how can you fit 2 minutes worth of content into 1 minute? So we really just have to form this picture, this visual in our head during that 1 minute's time. And once the examiner tells us to start talking, we will simply start to describe that picture in our head. So visualize the topic. For example, if my topic is describe a meal that you enjoyed, I will just try to picture, I would try to think back to that day, that event, and I am now in my head looking at that beautiful place that I was at and the variety of food and also people that were there at the event. So I'm visualizing this picture, and when the examiner tells me to start talking, I really just start describing that picture. Now, it's very common for students to waste that entire 1 minute's preparation time trying to come up with the best idea. Well, you should have rather used that time to come up with content rather than just deciding what topic you will talk about. Go with the first idea that pops in your head. So we now know that part 2 of our speaking test is more of a storytelling. So we should practice storytelling daily because, again, this is a skill that may take some time to develop. So every day practice talking on a topic, any topic really. But when you do that, make sure that you're recording your speaking and practice talking for at least 3 minutes. Now, here's how we're gonna do that. Every day, try talking on at least one topic. Any random topic really. First, give yourself time to think of the ideas, and then before you start talking, turn on the recorder on your phone or just your regular recorder and then record your speaking. Also time yourself. Try to talk continuously for about 3 minutes. Now, when you stop talking, go back and listen to your recording. Also see whether you were able to continue talking for 3 minutes. If not, now try to think what else you could have said in order for you to, continue the talk. Again, add those ideas to your talk and start talking again. Continue doing that until you have a full 3 minutes recording. Now, if you keep doing this consistently for, say, a week or 10 days, you would realize that speaking continuously for 2 minutes is not a problem anymore because you're now used to talking continuously for about 3 minutes, and 2 minutes is a piece of cake for you now. Ideally, we should talk at our own natural pace, but it is common for students to get nervous during their speaking, and that may cause them to talk a little fast. Now, what happens there is our fluency score may suffer, our pronunciation score may suffer, because when we talk fast, we're probably not pronouncing the words right. And thirdly, we'll run out of ideas. So if you can practice to talk a little slowly, that will help you to continue talking because our content will last longer because we're talking slowly. B, while we're talking, we're also able to think of ideas at the same time because we're not rushing with our talk. We're slowly talking and also thinking of the ideas. Now, while some students may find that the bullet points on the cue card restrict their talk, they may find that if they follow the bullet points, their story does not flow naturally. But there are students who are just not able to come up with enough ideas on their own. And if they try describing a story, they are not very good storytellers, and maybe their story is all over the place. For them, I would recommend following the bullet points because, first of all, if you do not have ideas, you can simply go on describing those bullet points one by one. Secondly, when you're answering those bullet points one by one, your story is also more coherent because it has some structure, it has some sequence, so it is more organized. practice both the approaches and see which one works for you. Don't waste that time drawing diagrams or trying to write everything that you're going to talk about during that 1 minute's time. Really, how many times do you look at your notes when you're talking during your IELTS preparation? And this is what I always see students doing. They spend their entire time scribbling away, but then when I tell them to start talking, I hardly ever see students looking at those notes that they made while they're talking. So they basically wasted that entire 1 minute's time writing content, writing things and words and phrases that they won't even use. So during that 1 minute's time, really try and form a picture in your head, and then when the examiner tells you to start talking, just start describing that picture, that visual in your mind. Now, you do not always have to tell the truth in speaking. For example, if the examiner asks which is your favorite sport, and if I say my favorite sport is football, for example, even if it isn't, and if the examiner can clearly tell that I do not know the first thing about football, I'm not going to lose marks. But also, if you find it hard to come up with or just like cook up a story, but you also do not have ideas for the topic you have got, it is okay to talk about a similar topic, but the examiner should also know that you did understand the topic right, and you only chose to talk about a similar topic rather than talking about that exact topic because you're not familiar with it. For example, now say my cue card topic is describe an interesting TV program you watched about a science topic. A science topic. I don't think I ever watch TV about or movies or TV shows about science topic. I really only watch dramas or documentaries at best. But a science topic, maybe I have, but it's not something that I recall in that moment. So it is totally okay for me to respond to this question like this. Well, as much as I love watching TV, a science program is not something I would want to spend my time on, because I really only watch TV for entertainment and not for information or knowledge. So I'm sorry, I cannot talk about a science program that I have watched, but I can describe this TV show that I recently started watching. It is a documentary, so I would say somewhat close, but not the exact same thing. Now, it is a documentary about COVID, the pandemic. It is about in the next part of the test, I'm going to give you a topic, and I'd like you to speak for about 1 to 2 minutes. You'll have 1 minute to prepare your talk. I'll also give you some paper and a pencil to make notes. Is that clear? Here's your paper and pencil, and you now have 1 minute to prepare. Now I'd like you to describe a situation when you had a talk with a stranger. Remember, you have 1 to 2 minutes to talk. So don't worry if I stop you. I'll tell you when the time is up. You can start speaking now, please. Well, being an extrovert, I have never been one to shy away from making new friends or talking to people I've never met before. One such conversation happened, I think it was 3-4 years ago. This is when I was traveling to Alberta, and it was a 14-hour long bus ride, and the views, however, were absolutely breathtaking. 14 hours and I did not sleep a wink. I just couldn't get enough of the views, but the person sitting next to me, he didn't seem to care much for the views, and as we started to chat, I found out that he used to frequent this route as a student, and I'm like, okay, well, that explains your lack of interest. And he also told me how he too found this route extremely beautiful, how he too clicked hundreds of pictures of the views the first time he was traveling in the Greyhound in this bus, and the first trip he made to Alberta. And what I found most interesting about this conversation is I think the realization that it is intrinsic to human nature, I believe, to just eventually get bored of things, no matter how excited we are the first time we're experiencing something. But as we start to experience that same thing repeatedly, we just don't find it as fascinating. Now, this view, the beautiful Rockies, were something that I just couldn't get enough of during the first trip. But the second time I went to Alberta, they just didn't look the same, or they at least did not look as